Welcome to Sacred Cow Shipyards, where no ship is safe from being called a cow. It has come to my attention that a disturbing number of you squishies have absolutely no comprehension of the laws on your planet. So who better to explain those laws to you than someone who has gone out of their way to never visit your planet and thereby is probably not subject to your laws? I mean, I can't imagine your laws extend multiple light years into space, so let's go ahead and go with, yeah, I'm not subject to your laws. But I do understand them better than a disturbing number of you, which should tell you something. Something not good. So, yeah. And really, the laws that I am actually going to be talking about in this episode on your planet, or the laws on your planet that I'm going to be talking about in this episode, however you want to phrase it, can be concatenated or contained, or all the laws I'm talking about are contained within the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, otherwise known as UNCLOS. I don't know why the of got included into the acronym as opposed to the on, the, and the, but you know what? Everyone calls it UNCLOS, so we're just going to go with UNCLOS. Fine. UNCLOS basically states that the vast majority of your planet is lawless. I mean, that's not technically what it states, but that is the ramifications of what it states in the end, and this is where it all gets kind of weird. I mean, let me break this down for you Barney style before we all get all kinds of complicated in the entire complication of all this complicated details. In the province of Florida, inside of the super province known as the United States of America, there is a city called Miami. And Miami is host to a number of casino boats, except they're not actually casino boats. They are boats that go out from Miami past 12 nautical miles from any point in the United States, and then they become casino boats because they are in international waters. And while neither Miami nor Florida allow gambling inside of their district area borders, once you get outside of 12 nautical miles, there's very little rules. And yeah, you're in international waters at that point. So crank up the slot machines and off you go to the races. And yes, there is an actual industry in a number of coastal cities where they just have boats that all they do is make a beeline for what is called international waters. And then they crank up the gambling devices that you use. I don't know most of them. And then they make bank off of their passengers because, of course, the house always wins in gambling situations. And then they go home and they drop off their passengers, and their passengers think they had a good time, except they were losing money the entire time. But this is why the concept of international waters is a little weird and complicated. So what are international waters legally? Well, that's a pretty complicated question. But UNCLOS, again, weird acronym, but still I'm going to keep calling it that, does provide some level of explanation. International waters are all waters that are more than 12 nautical miles from any shore of any country, or possibly the low water mark, although that's a new addition and kind of complicated, but let's just stick with the shoreline. International waters is any water more than 12 nautical miles from the shoreline of a given country. That's it. And yeah, if you know anything about the geography of your planet, there is a fuck ton of water that is more than 12 nautical miles from any shoreline anywhere. Now, on the flip side, I suppose I should explain what actually territorial waters actually mean. Territorial waters are kind of what they sound like. It's kind of like the country just decided that they own 12 nautical miles out into the sea or the ocean or whatever, and that's theirs. And technically the country didn't decide this. Your United Nations decided this. But your United Nations did in fact decide that your countries have a 12 nautical mile ownership of the waters around them and inside of them. I mean, internal waters are obviously explicitly owned by the country that contains the waters. But any kind of waters that might be considered international have a 12 nautical mile line. What that specifically means is that basically any ship that is not flagged as the ship that owns the water shouldn't be there unless they had a purpose for being there and unless it was previously agreed upon. That is to say that territorial waters don't stop, say, freighters from going from international waters to the port and unloading their cargo. Of course not. Countries couldn't make do with, international shipping without that kind of concession. But that said, unless you have a reason to be there, you should not be inside of territorial waters. Now, territorial waters do differ from what is called the exclusive economic zone. Basically, territorial waters extend 12 nautical miles out from the shoreline. The exclusive economic zone extends 200 nautical miles out from the shoreline. That said, the only limitation in the EEZ, Economic Exclusion Zone or Exclusive Economic Zone or whatever the hell it's called, is that you're not actually allowed to make economic use of what is in that area without that country's permission. That is to say, if you want to go, say, commercially fishing or set up a commercial oil rig or something like that, you have to ask that particular country's permission, and if they don't give it to you, you can't do it. But EEZs, exclusive economic zones, have no control over the navigation of ships. As long as those ships stay outside of 12 nautical miles from your shore, they can do as they please. They can navigate wherever they want, and the EEZ has no bearing on this. It only matters if they try to make economic exploitation of that area. And then you might have a question or a problem or whatever, how you ever want to phrase it. But in general, as long as the ships stay outside of 12 nautical miles from your shore, they can do whatever they please. Now, on your planet, there are some situations where ships cannot stay 12 nautical miles from your shore. And this is where it gets complicated. Your Wikipedia nightmare defines the concept of a strait as a landform connecting two seas or two water basins. Not very specific, is it? Yeah. Navigationally, a strait on your planet is a narrow section of water. That's pretty much it. And typically, either side of the strait are international waters eventually. There are large bodies of water on either side of this narrow section of water. This isn't always guaranteed, but it's pretty standard either way. And straits are complicated because most straits are less than, 12 nautical miles wide, especially the navigable parts of the strait. I mean, the strait itself might be, 100 miles wide, but the navigable part, the part where ships can actually sail, is right up against one coast, inside of 12 nautical miles. That means it's territorial waters, right? That means you shouldn't be there unless you have a cause to be there, right? Well, no. This is where it gets complicated. See, UNCLOS has this concept called transit passage. Basically, if you are going from the high seas to the high seas, that is to say, you're going from international waters to international waters, and the only way to get from A to B is by way of, territorial waters, you're allowed to do it. And I mean, frankly, I don't know how else you would come up with an acceptable conclusion with straits. I mean, straits are narrow bodies of water. They're sometimes so narrow that multiple parties could have a claim as to the ownership of the strait. I mean, straits are frequently less than 12 nautical miles wide, and it's unusual for a single country to own both sides of the strait. So how do you settle the disagreement between the two countries as to who owns which part of the strait? Well, technically, their territorial waters are kind of like split the difference. But even though they split the difference in the territorial waters, they have to allow ships transit because that's the only way to get from A to B. It's the only way to get from one section of the high seas to the other section of the high seas. And UNCLOS, the United Nations, has decided that this is how it shall be. If ships need to get from A to B and it goes through territorial waters, then the countries whose territory it is have to allow them to do that. And I really, honestly cannot stress how important this rule is. I mean, there is a strait on your planet called the Strait of Malacca. It goes between Indonesia, Malaysia, and Singapore, and a massive chunk of the shipping traffic on your planet goes through this narrow area. Singapore, Malaysia, and Indonesia all have claims on this particular tract of water, but given how important it is a strait, and thereby they have to allow ships transit. Likewise, the Strait of Hormuz is the entrance to the Persian Gulf, or the exit to the Persian Gulf, depending on how you want to phrase it. And the navigable sections of it are variously owned by Oman, the United Arab Emirates, and Iran. And legally, by international law, these countries have to allow ships transit. And given that a massive quantity of your petroleum travels through that particular strait, it's kind of a big deal that that happens. And likewise, another significant shipping strait on your planet is a strait called Bab al-Mandeb. This is the entrance or exit, again, it really is immaterial, to the Red Sea. And all three of Yemen, Eritrea, and Djibouti have claims to the water. But since it's a strait, they can't stop ships from going through the water. It's a strait. They have to have free transit. This is how things work. I mean, even if you took their claims of the water and you averaged them, because I mean, all three of these countries have 12 nautical mile claims, of course, but those overlap. So you have to average their claims and then squish them together and figure out some median line between them. Well, that median line is probably not navigationally useful, especially given how continental shelves work on your planet. And ships have to be able to transit from the Gulf of Aden into the Red Sea. And without being able to do that, honestly, a significant chunk of your world just stops. And this is true for every strait on your globe. They're all navigational choke points. Whether we're talking about the Straits of Gibraltar or the Tierra del Fuego, everything, well, maybe not the Tierra del Fuego, because naturally the Panama Canal provided a bypass for that, but still, it doesn't really matter. Straits have to allow transit. This is international law. I mean, one of the more, I suppose, amusing aspects of this particular detail is that if, say, you were in the Gulf of Mexico on your planet, and you are a deep water ship, say your draft was more than 25 feet or so, which is not uncommon for large ships, and you wanted to go to the Atlantic Ocean, the easy way of doing that is, of course, going between the Florida Keys and Cuba. Well, technically, the space between Florida and Cuba is a lot more than 24 nautical miles. There's a lot of international water. There's a lot of high seas between those two places. Except you're a deep draft vehicle. The only safe way of getting from A to B actually puts you about 10 to 8 nautical miles off of Cuba, well inside of their territorial waters. It's not even technically a strait in this case. This is even where it gets even stranger. This falls under the concept of something called the right of passage. Again, basically it boils down to getting from A to B is legal as long as all you're doing is getting from A to B. If you're doing something else along the way, then the country whose territorial water you're going through might pitch a fit and you might be in trouble. But if all you're doing is actually transiting from one body of water to the other body of the water, and unfortunately that does include transiting through territorial waters, well, that sucks. Sorry, we're just passing through. Have a nice day. Now, there are some screwball exceptions to this entire situation. I did mention previously the exclusive economic zone, and like I said previously, that basically boils down to you're just not allowed to fish or dig for oil or do economic things inside of that zone for commercial purposes without the country's permission. Likewise, the 12 nautical mile rule kind of allows for like dents in the terrain. Like if you had a harbor or like another kind of like dent in your shoreline, then if the mouth is less than 12 nautical miles wide, then you can just claim it as internal waters and it's still your territorial waters. Now, some countries have kind of abused this concept. Notably, Libya attempted to claim the entirety of the Gulf of Sidra once upon a time as their territorial waters. That gulf is somewhere around the neighborhood of 60 nautical miles wide, I believe, and the country tried to claim the entire thing. And the United States did what they occasionally do, and that is what is called the freedom of navigation operations. Basically, they say that, hey, international law says that, hey, you've got this line, and that's fine. We won't argue with that idea. But if you want to claim past that point, we're just going to park an entire goddamn carrier battle group inside of the line you think you should have, but outside of the line that you legally have, and then we see what you do. In this case, the short answer is Libya lost a lot of people because they tried to enforce their quote-unquote line of death, and, well, they fucked around, and I guess they found out. Notably, they lost 72 people, 1 corvette, 1 patrol boat, and lost a lot of other equipment, and the USAians lost nothing. Not a soul, not a piece of equipment, not a goddamn thing. But all the USAians were doing was reminding the Libyans that just because you have this massive bay built into your country doesn't mean you can claim the entire goddamn bay. International waters are 12 nautical miles off your shore. And if the bay is more than 12 nautical miles wide, you can't claim the whole goddamn thing. This is the rule. This is how it works. And this is why the USAians do freedom of navigation operations. To remind people that there are rules when it comes to, international waters. And as I said, these are important rules. These are rules that you humies have been killing each other, murdering each other, annihilating each other over for, centuries. Y'all have been fighting over the water for forever. And your United Nations, for all of its various faults, and they are many, decided that y'all should stop fucking off, and everything outside of 12 nautical miles is not really your problem. Now, some countries on your planet, China, are being dickwads about how to exploit the UNCLOS rules and regulations and so on and so forth. But still, the reason such things like transit passage exist is because if you don't let ships go through, people get cranky. And when people get cranky, they might sail a fire ship into your harbor and then blow it the fuck up. Now, I'm not saying that's a reasonable response. I'm not even saying that's a correct response. I am simply saying that that is a response that has happened in your history multiple times. From multiple parties, in fact. People get really, really, really cranky when you start obstructing shipping. Because shipping is how your world works at the moment. You don't have some sort of like suborbital transit for heavy equipment or heavy materials or heavy anything. You barely have suborbital anything, let's be honest here. Your entire world runs on shipping and has run on shipping basically since you invented ships. It's a thing. And upset that apple cart at your fucking peril. And the funny thing is the rules are laid out. I mean, again, I have no particular appreciation for your United Nations, especially their harboring of rapists and other sexual assaulters. But still, the rules are fairly laid out. And the rules are fairly clear. I mean, even my minions can understand them in this particular context. And, I mean, I'm shocked that so many of y'all just don't understand the basic fundamentals. 12 nautical miles, countries own it. 200 nautical miles, they own the economic value of it, but they can't stop you from going through it. And when it comes to navigational straits, you have to let ships through. And if you don't, well, the polite way of handling you is treating you like a pirate. The impolite way, or I would argue the correct way of handling you at that point, is to treat you like a foreign aggressor. Because firing on a foreign flag ship, or capturing a foreign flag ship, or even forcing a foreign flag ship to go somewhere it doesn't want to go, yeah, all of those are declarations of war. I'm not sure how many countries on your planet actually want to do that. I mean, I guess y'all might be finding out sometime soon, won't you? And that's all from Sacred Cow Shipyards. Please be advised that any ship left on the docks for more than 24 hours will be compressed to a cube at the owner's expense. Have a nice day.